"Who closed the $50 million deal?" the CEO asked. No one in the boardroom moved. Then, her assistant looked down and said, "The single dad you fired yesterday." 24 hours earlier, Ethan Cole had walked out of that same building carrying his life in a cardboard box, wondering how he was going to tell his 8-year-old daughter that he no longer had a job. He was supposed to be nobody, just an IT technician working in the basement. But before sunrise, Ethan would do something no executive in that glass tower could do, and uncover a secret powerful enough to destroy a career, shake an entire company, and change 2 lonely lives forever. Stay with this story, because what happened next is about more than money. It is about dignity, sacrifice, second chances, and being seen when the world has already decided your worth. If you believe people deserve a second chance, like the video and comment where you're watching from, the answer in that boardroom had sounded impossible. A single father, an IT technician, a man fired less than 24 hours earlier. But to understand why Ethan Cole had been sitting in a basement instead of negotiating deals worth millions, you had to go back to the morning before Madeline Halstead ever learned his name. At 9:17 on a cold Tuesday in Charlotte, Ethan was called into a windowless conference room on the 2nd floor. He knew before he sat down. People like to believe losing a job arrived with drama, raised voices, accusations, a manager unable to meet your eyes. Most of the time it came quietly, a folder on a table, a glass of water nobody touched, a human resources representative speaking in a careful voice that had been practiced enough times to sound almost gentle. Ethan sat across from his supervisor, Martin Hayes, and a woman from Human Resources whose name he had seen in emails but never met. Martin kept both hands flat on the table. "Ethan, I'm sorry." Ethan looked at the folder between them. "Are you—" Martin swallowed. The woman from Human Resources stepped in. "This is part of an organizational restructuring." Ethan looked at her. She was young, maybe 29. There was sympathy in her face, but sympathy did not change the paper. "How many people?" She hesitated. Ethan noticed. "How many people are being restructured?" Martin looked down. "Just this position." There it was. Ethan leaned back slightly. No anger crossed his face. That seemed to make Martin more uncomfortable. He opened the folder and read the termination letter once. Then again, his attention stopped at the bottom of the page. Approved by Grant Mercer, Chief Operating Officer. Ethan placed the letter back on the table. "Interesting." Martin looked up. "What is nothing?" The Human Resources representative began explaining final pay insurance coverage, unused vacation time. Ethan listened because that was easier than thinking about Sophie. School pickup, mortgage payment, groceries, the electricity bill sitting unopened beside the toaster. He had savings, enough to keep them safe for a while, but an 8-year-old did not understand savings accounts. An 8-year-old understood whether her father looked worried when he opened the refrigerator. When the meeting ended, Martin followed him into the hallway. "Ethan." Ethan stopped. Martin lowered his voice. "I didn't make this decision, I know." I pushed back. Ethan studied him. "Did you?" Martin looked away. That was answer enough. Ethan nodded once and walked toward the elevator. 6 years. That was how long he had worked at Halstead and Rowe Capital. 6 years fixing laptops, replacing network cards, resetting passwords, rebuilding corrupted drives, and explaining to senior vice presidents that turning a monitor off and on again did not make them stupid. Most people in the building knew him only as Ethan from IT. Some called him Eric. One executive had called him Evan for 3 years. Ethan never corrected him. Being overlooked had once felt humiliating. Then it became peaceful. By the time he reached the basement, someone had already disabled his access badge. He held it to the reader. Red light. He tried again out of habit. Red light. A younger technician named Kyle glanced over from behind 2 monitors. "You okay?" Ethan looked at the badge, apparently not employed. Kyle blinked. "What, they let me go?" Kyle stood. Why, Ethan looked around the basement office. Fluorescent lights, metal shelves, cables in labeled plastic bins, a printer in the corner making a clicking sound no one had bothered to fix because it still printed. Restructuring. Kyle stared at him. "That's garbage." Ethan gave him a small smile. "Probably. You've been here longer than almost everybody. That's not how restructuring works." Kyle looked angry enough for both of them. Ethan was grateful for that. He did not have the energy to be angry yet. His desk took less than 5 minutes to clear. A chipped coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Dad." A framed photograph of his wife Claire taken on a rooftop in Manhattan 11 years earlier. She was laughing at something outside the frame. Her dark hair was blowing across her face. Ethan had always loved that picture because she looked completely unprepared for the camera. Nothing guarded, nothing posed, just Claire. The third thing was a folded card made from blue construction paper. Sophie had drawn a stick figure of Ethan standing beside a stove with smoke rising from a pan. Underneath, in purple marker, she had written, "Best Dad even when you burn pancakes." Ethan stared at it longer than the other two items. Then he placed it carefully on top. Near the bottom of his drawer sat a thick printed folder, Atlas Renewables. He looked toward the door, then at the folder. Company policy prohibited employees from printing confidential transaction documents without authorization. Ethan knew that. He also knew exactly why he had printed these. The original Atlas agreement contained a liability protection that had vanished from the newest draft. He had noticed it 3 nights earlier while solving a permission problem in the deal room. At first, he assumed legal had intentionally removed it. Then he checked the revision history. The change made no sense, not commercially, not legally, not strategically. It shifted environmental liabilities toward Halstead and Rowe without receiving anything meaningful in return. Ethan had raised the issue once. Grant Mercer had been in the room. That had been the beginning of the end. Ethan took the folder and slid it beneath his coffee mug. "I'm keeping this." Kyle looked at him. "What is it, insurance?" Against what? Ethan closed the box. "I'll let you know when I figure that out." The elevator rejected his badge again, so Ethan carried the box up the service stairs. By the time he reached the lobby, his shoulder ached. Tommy Ruiz was sitting behind the security desk. Tommy had been there since before half the executives upstairs had learned the difference between revenue and profit. He looked at the box, then at Ethan. "No." Ethan kept walking. Tommy stood. "No, no, no. What happened? I got restructured." Tommy stared at him. "You're the only man I know who can make getting fired sound boring. I'm trying." Tommy came around the desk and took the box before Ethan could object. "You didn't do anything." Ethan gave him a look. Tommy sighed. "Fine. Anything they can prove." That earned a quiet laugh. They walked toward the revolving doors together. Outside, the city looked silver beneath the winter sky. Traffic moved along Tryon Street. Men in expensive coats crossed intersections while speaking into phones. A delivery truck double-parked near the curb. The world had not changed because Ethan Cole no longer had a job. That offended him more than he expected. Tommy placed the box in the trunk of Ethan's Honda. "You did good work down there." Ethan shut the trunk. "Thank you, I mean it. I know." Tommy leaned against the car. "You were too smart for that basement anyway." Ethan looked up at the tower. 32 floors of glass. His old office in New York had been higher. Back then he could see the Hudson from his desk. He had hated the view because everybody who entered the room mentioned it. This basement was exactly where I wanted to be. Tommy studied him. There were questions in his face. He did not ask them. Ethan appreciated him for that, too. At 2:43 that afternoon, Ethan pulled into the driveway of the small brick house he shared with Sophie and Matthews just outside Charlotte. He sat in the car for almost 5 minutes. Claire had once said Ethan could negotiate with a room full of hostile bankers without blinking, but became useless whenever he had to tell someone he loved that something was wrong. She had been right. He looked at the front door, then at the cardboard box beside him. He moved the box into the trunk and covered it with an old blanket. Sophie did not need to see it. Not yet. When he entered the house, she was at the kitchen table surrounded by colored pencils and multiplication worksheets. Her brown hair was tied into a crooked ponytail. She looked up immediately. "You're home." Ethan set his keys down. "So are you. I live here." "Good point." She narrowed her eyes. "You're home early." He opened the refrigerator. There were eggs, milk, half a container of strawberries, cheese, and a jar of mustard. He stared at the shelves as if they contained an explanation. Behind him, Sophie said, "You got fired." His hand stopped on the refrigerator door. Silence. Then she laughed. "I'm kidding." Ethan turned. Sophie's smile faded when she saw his face. "Dad?" He closed the refrigerator. "They're moving some things around at work." She rested her pencil on the table. Good moving or bad moving? Temporary moving. That doesn't answer the question. She had Claire's way of looking at him when she knew he was avoiding something. It still startled him sometimes. Ethan walked over and kissed the top of her head. "How about grilled cheese?" "That also doesn't answer the question." "Extra cheese." She considered it. "You're bribing me. Is it working?" "Yes." He made dinner while Sophie told him about school. A boy named Mason had brought a lizard for show and tell. Her teacher had promised they could read outside if the weather got warmer. She thought she had missed 2 questions on her math test, but was pretty sure one should not count because the wording was unfair. Ethan listened, really listened. That was the point of the life he had built. Nothing mattered more than being present enough to hear which math question an 8-year-old considered unjust. His phone vibrated on the counter. A company notification. He ignored it, then another and another. Sophie took a bite of grilled cheese. "Your phone is mad at you. It'll survive." "Can phones survive?" "This one unfortunately can." She smiled. His phone vibrated again. Atlas. Ethan knew without looking. He kept his eyes on Sophie. Later that night, after she was asleep, Ethan stood alone in the kitchen. The house felt different when Sophie slept. Too quiet. He opened the cabinet above the refrigerator and removed a small metal box. He had not opened it in nearly 3 years. Inside were the parts of his life he had never shown Sophie. An old Blackwell Sterling Partners business card. His name printed beneath the words, "Managing Director." A photograph taken outside the New York Stock Exchange. 3 newspaper clippings. 1 magazine profile. A black fountain pen Claire had given him after his first major deal. He picked up the pen. For a moment the kitchen disappeared. Manhattan returned, glass walls, midnight, a conference table buried beneath legal drafts. 2 teams had been arguing for hours. Ethan was 31. His suit cost more than the car he drove now. Across from him, a senior banker whispered to another executive. "Cole hasn't said anything in 40 minutes. The executive leaned back. "That's when you should worry." Ethan kept reading, clause by clause. People around him became impatient. Then he saw it. A restriction buried inside a financing condition that gave the opposing party more leverage than anyone had realized. Ethan closed the document. "Take $12 million off the price." The other side laughed. Their lead negotiator leaned forward. "Excuse me, you heard me. You have no basis for that." Ethan slid the agreement across the table. Section 9.4. Your financing representation contradicts Schedule 17. If your lender changes the covenant after signing, my client carries the risk while you keep the upside. Silence. The opposing lawyer grabbed the pages. Ethan continued, $12 million, or we walk before midnight. 20 minutes later, they agreed. People called Ethan brilliant. Claire called him at 11:43 p.m. He looked at the phone. Claire home. He rejected the call. The room applauded when the documents were signed. Ethan smiled for photographs. He came home after 2 in the morning. There had been a plate covered with foil on the kitchen counter. Beside it a note. "You won the deal. You missed dinner." Again. He had saved the note. Years later, it still hurt more than any argument they ever had. Claire never asked him to quit. That almost made it worse. She believed him every time he said things would calm down. After this deal, after this quarter, after this promotion, there would always be time later. Until there was not. Claire died on an ordinary Tuesday. No accident, no warning. One moment she was complaining about a headache. Hours later, Ethan sat beneath fluorescent hospital lights while a doctor explained the word aneurysm in a voice meant for people whose lives had just split in half. Sophie was 8 months old. Ethan held her against his chest in the hospital corridor while she cried. He wore a charcoal suit. There was a signed term sheet in his briefcase. His phone rang 16 times. He never answered it again. 3 weeks later, he resigned. His partners thought grief had made him irrational. Maybe it had. They offered him leave, money, a reduced schedule, a sabbatical. One partner told him he was throwing away a career men would kill to have. Ethan looked at Sophie sleeping in a stroller and thought that was exactly the problem. So he disappeared. He sold the Manhattan apartment, moved south, changed industries, stopped returning calls. He chose Charlotte because nobody there cared about the man he had been in New York. He took an IT job because technology had always come easily to him and because computers did not schedule meetings on Sundays. He could leave at 5. He could make dinner. He could attend school plays. He could sit beside Sophie when she had a fever at 2 in the morning without wondering which managing director would be angry the next day. For 6 years, Ethan became ordinary. He loved ordinary. Then Atlas Renewables landed in the company's system. 3 nights before his firing, Ethan had been asked to solve an access issue for a shared transaction folder. He fixed the permissions in 12 minutes. He should have logged out. Instead, one line caught his attention. Legacy environmental liabilities shall transfer to purchaser upon closing. Ethan stared at it. He opened the earlier draft. Different language. The original protected Halstead Rowe from undisclosed contamination at several industrial properties Atlas had acquired years earlier. That protection was gone. Ethan checked the revision trail. The deletion had been approved manually. Grant Mercer. The next afternoon, Ethan walked into a transaction review meeting because an associate had asked him to resolve a file syncing problem. Lawyers argued while Ethan worked quietly near the wall. Grant stood at the head of the table. "We send the current draft tonight." Ethan looked up. "You can't." The room went silent. Grant turned slowly. "I'm sorry." Ethan nodded toward the screen. "The indemnity language," one of the lawyers frowned. "What about it?" "You removed the legacy liability carve-out." Grant's expression changed. Barely. But Ethan saw it. "That isn't your concern. If Atlas has undisclosed environmental exposure, it becomes ours at closing." Grant looked around the room, smiling as if Ethan had told a joke. "You fix systems, Mr. Cole. Lawyers fix contracts." A few people looked down. Ethan should have stopped. He knew that, but the old part of him had already awakened. Lawyers usually notice when a company accepts unlimited legacy liability. Nobody moved. Grant's smile vanished. "Get out." Ethan closed the laptop. As he reached the door, Grant said, "And stay away from transaction files that do not concern you." Ethan looked back. "They concerned me because you put them on a system I was asked to repair." Grant's eyes hardened. Ethan left. The next morning he was fired. Now, sitting at his kitchen table with the Atlas folder open, Ethan finally checked his phone. 7 alerts. The last one read, "Atlas Council rejects final terms, signing on hold." Below it was another message generated automatically through the external deal room. "Unless revised terms are received by midnight, Atlas intends to terminate discussions." Ethan looked at the clock, 9:08 p.m. He closed the folder. Not his problem. He had been fired. Not warned, not suspended. Fired. Grant wanted him gone. The company had agreed. Ethan stood and walked toward the sink. He poured himself water. From down the hallway came Sophie's voice. "Dad?" He set the glass down. She appeared wearing pajamas covered in tiny blue stars. "I can't sleep." "Bad dream, no." She climbed onto one of the kitchen chairs. "You look mad." "I'm not mad. You have the face." "What face?" "The quiet face." Ethan smiled despite himself. "What does the quiet face look like? Like you're arguing with somebody in your head?" Claire used to say almost the same thing. He pulled out the chair beside her. Sophie leaned against him. After a minute, she said, "Are we okay?" The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean, with work?" Ethan looked at her. She was 8 years old, too young to carry his fear, old enough to notice it. He touched her hair. "We're okay. You promise, I promise." She nodded. That was enough for her. Ethan walked her back to bed and waited until her breathing became slow and even. Then he returned to the kitchen. The Atlas folder was still open. He stared at it. He could let the deal die. Nobody could blame him. For once, walking away would be reasonable, maybe even healthy. But Ethan had spent most of his adult life believing that character was easiest to see when nobody owed you anything. He hated carelessness, always had. Especially when the consequences landed on people who never made the decision. Analysts who had worked 6 months, lawyers who had missed weekends, employees at both companies whose jobs depended on the transaction. He sat down. His external Atlas account was still active because the credentials had been issued through the third-party transaction platform rather than Halstead Rowe. He logged in. No internal systems, no restricted company access, just the material he had previously been authorized to review. Ethan opened the latest draft. For the first time in 10 years, his posture changed. His shoulders straightened. His eyes sharpened. The father, sitting at a kitchen table, became the negotiator people in New York once waited to hear speak. He rewrote the indemnity structure, limited the survival period, created an escrow mechanism, separated known liabilities from unknown environmental exposure. He cited public precedent from 3 comparable transactions. At 10:31 p.m., he sent the proposal directly to Atlas Counsel. 8 minutes later, his phone rang. New York area code. Ethan answered. A woman said, "This is Rebecca Sloan from Morrison Hale. Who exactly am I speaking with, Ethan Cole?" "I know the name on the email. I'm asking why an IT technician is rewriting acquisition language." Ethan looked down the hallway toward Sophie's room. "Tonight?" "Yes. Tonight I'm someone trying to keep 40 people from wasting 6 months of work." There was silence. Then Rebecca said, "Your escrow structure is interesting. It solves your board's concern. It creates another one, Section 12. Another pause. "Yes." Ethan smiled faintly. "I already fixed it." For the next 4 hours, the old rhythm returned. Calls, revisions, silences more important than words. Ethan never raised his voice. He did not need to. At 2:19 a.m., Atlas sent revised language. At 2:31, Ethan made one final change. At 2:37, Rebecca called. "We have authority to sign." Ethan leaned back. The kitchen was dark except for the laptop. Then sign. A minute later, the confirmation arrived. Executed. $50 million. Ethan looked at the screen. 10 years earlier, a deal like this would have meant champagne photographs, congratulations, and a car waiting downstairs. Now there was only the quiet hum of his refrigerator. He closed the laptop, walked into Sophie's room. Her blanket had slipped onto the floor. Ethan picked it up and covered her. She shifted in her sleep. "Dad, I'm here." Her eyes never opened. Ethan stood there for a moment. Then he turned off the hallway light and went to bed. Across Charlotte, Madeline Halstead's phone received the signed agreement while she slept. By morning, she had a $50 million deal nobody on her executive team could explain. By afternoon, she had Ethan Cole's personnel file open beside an 11-year-old photograph from Wall Street. She stared at the man in the old picture, then at the employee badge photo. The same eyes, the same face softened by time and something heavier. For 6 years he had worked beneath her feet. She had never met him. Her company had fired him. He had saved it anyway. Madeline closed the laptop, reached for her coat, and took Ethan Cole's home address from the personnel file before leaving the office. Madeline Halstead did not call ahead. She told herself that was because she did not want Ethan Cole to prepare an answer. The truth was less flattering. She had no idea what she was going to say. By the time she turned off Providence Road and followed the navigation toward Matthews, the city had changed around her. Glass towers had given way to grocery stores, darkened strip malls, church parking lots, and quiet streets lined with modest houses. It was after 11. Most porch lights were off. Ethan's was still on. Madeline slowed as she reached the address. A small brick house sat behind a narrow lawn. There was a bicycle tipped on its side near the garage. A basketball rested beneath the porch steps. One upstairs window glowed faintly behind pale curtains. She parked at the curb. For several seconds she did not move. The Atlas contract sat on the passenger seat beside her. $50 million. A transaction large enough to keep senior partners awake for weeks. A transaction nearly ruined by people with titles, salaries, and offices large enough to hold Ethan's entire basement workstation. And the man who had saved it lived here. Madeline picked up the contract, then put it back down. She had delivered difficult news to investors. She had fired executives. She had stood in front of hostile directors and defended decisions she had made with incomplete information. None of that felt as uncomfortable as walking toward the front door of a man her company had dismissed without learning who he was. She got out. Cold air touched her face. The neighborhood was quiet enough that she could hear a television playing softly somewhere inside the house. Madeline climbed the porch steps and raised her hand. She did not knock. Not immediately. What was the first sentence supposed to be? "Hello, I am the CEO of the company that fired you yesterday. Thank you for saving us anyway. Sorry we never noticed you. All of it sounded terrible. Movement passed behind the curtain. Madeline lowered her hand. A floorboard creaked. The door opened. Ethan stood there barefoot in a gray t-shirt and dark sweatpants. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He did not look surprised for long. His eyes moved to the contract under her arm, then back to her face. You found the signature. Madeline stared at him. Not a question, not even an accusation, just recognition. You knew I would. I knew somebody would. Eventually. She glanced past him into the house. Warm yellow light. A child's backpack on the floor near the stairs. A pair of tiny sneakers beneath a coat rack. Everything about the place felt ordinary. That bothered her in a way she could not explain. She looked back at Ethan. I found your name. He gave a small nod. I assumed that came with the signature. Blackwell Sterling Partners. No reaction. I found an article from 11 years ago. Ethan leaned one shoulder against the doorframe. Then you found a very old photograph. You were a managing director. Once. People wrote about you. People write about a lot of things. You structured the Latham acquisition. His expression shifted. Only slightly. Madeline saw it. And the Wexler cross-border merger. That was a team. 3 articles called you the lead negotiator. Articles like simple stories. Madeline's frustration rose. Why are you doing that? Doing what? Making this sound ordinary. Ethan looked at her for a long second, then quietly said, Because it was another life. Madeline tightened her grip on the contract. You worked in my basement for 6 years. Yes. You fix printers. Sometimes. You reset passwords. Frequently. You help junior analysts connect monitors. More often than you would think. And you never thought anyone should know you used to negotiate transactions larger than this company. No. The answer was immediate. That unsettled her more than hesitation would have. Madeline studied him. Why? Ethan glanced inside the house, his voice lowered. Because I did not want that life anymore. Madeline looked at him. She wanted a better explanation, something dramatic, something that would make the contradiction easier to understand. Instead, Ethan simply stood there as though disappearing from a career other people would spend decades trying to build was a decision no stranger was entitled to question. She held the contract out. You saved a $50 million deal after we fired you. Ethan looked at the folder, then at her. I fixed language that should not have been broken. That is not the same thing. It is to me. You could have let the deal die. Yes. You had every reason to. Probably. Then why did you help us? Ethan looked toward the street. A car passed at the far end of the block. Its headlights moved across the lawn and disappeared. When he spoke, his voice was quieter. Because people spent months on that deal. That is your reason. Part of it. People who worked for the company that fired you. Yes. People who did not even know your name. Ethan looked at her. Being angry at someone is not permission to become careless. Madeline said nothing. The sentence landed with uncomfortable precision. He did not say it to impress her. That was what made it worse. There was no bitterness in his face, no satisfaction in making her feel guilty. He believed it. Madeline looked down at the contract. I do not understand you. Ethan gave the faintest hint of a smile. I am not sure that is necessary. Before she could answer, a small voice came from inside. Dad! Ethan turned instantly. The change in him was immediate. His shoulders softened. The guarded stillness disappeared. A little girl appeared halfway down the hallway wearing pajamas covered with blue moons and stars. Her brown hair was messy from sleep. She looked at Madeline with open curiosity. Sophie. Ethan's voice was gentle. Back to bed. Sophie ignored that. She walked closer. Who is she? Ethan opened his mouth. Madeline answered first. My name is Madeline. Sophie looked at Ethan. Is she from work? Ethan glanced at Madeline. Yes. Sophie considered this. Are you his boss? Madeline felt something in her chest tighten. Technically, I was. Sophie frowned. Was... Ethan stepped slightly into the doorway. Bug. The warning was soft. Sophie heard it. She looked at him more carefully. Madeline noticed that too. This child watched her father the way experienced executives watched a negotiation table, for changes, for things that were not being said. Madeline crouched slightly so she was closer to Sophie's height. "I came because I owe your dad an apology." Sophie looked at Ethan, then back at Madeline. "A big one." Madeline almost smiled. "A pretty big one." Sophie thought about that, then nodded. "He likes chocolate." Ethan closed his eyes for half a second. "Sophie? What? Bed?" Sophie looked at Madeline again. "Dark chocolate, not the weird orange kind." Madeline smiled now. "That is useful information." "Good." Sophie turned and walked back down the hall. Halfway to her room, she called back, "Good night, work lady." Madeline laughed before she could stop herself. Ethan watched Sophie disappear into her bedroom. When the door clicked shut, he looked back at Madeline. For the first time since opening the front door, something unguarded moved across his face. Exhaustion, love, fear, maybe all three. Madeline lowered her voice. "She does not know." Ethan knew what she meant. "No, you have not told her you lost your job." "Not yet." "Why?" He leaned against the doorframe again. "Because she is 8. 8-year-olds notice things." "I know. She noticed tonight." "I know." There was no defensiveness in his voice, only tiredness. Madeline realized he had probably had this argument with himself already, many times. Ethan looked toward Sophie's room. She has already had enough uncertainty in her life. Madeline did not ask what that meant. She knew enough from the old articles. One profile mentioned Ethan's abrupt departure from New York after the death of his wife. At the time, it had been treated as an industry mystery, a brilliant negotiator vanishing at the peak of his career. No one had written about the little girl standing in the hallway tonight. No one had written about the father making grilled cheese in a quiet house outside Charlotte. Madeline felt suddenly embarrassed by every article she had read that afternoon. They had all described Ethan as though his disappearance belonged to finance. It had belonged to Sophie. "I want to fix your termination." Ethan looked at her. "Tomorrow." "No." Madeline blinked. No. You have not even heard the offer. I heard the word fix. Your termination was wrong." Probably, Ethan folded his arms. "You are standing on my porch at 11 at night. I assume you did not come here because everything went smoothly." Madeline ignored that. "I can reinstate you immediately." "I do not want reinstatement. We can discuss compensation." "No." "A different position." "No." Madeline stared at him. "I am trying to make this right." Ethan's expression changed slightly. Not anger, something closer to disappointment. "That is what companies say when they make a mistake and want to move quickly enough that nobody has time to ask why the mistake happened." Madeline went still. Ethan continued, "You can give me a new title, you can increase my salary, you can write an apology and put it in my personnel file." He looked at the contract in her hands. "None of that explains why Grant Mercer personally cared enough about an IT technician to approve his termination." Madeline felt the cold more sharply now. "He signed the form." "Yes?" "You noticed." "I noticed signatures." The answer was dry enough that Madeline nearly smiled. She did not. "Why would Grant want you gone?" "If I knew, I would tell you." "You must have an idea." Ethan looked at her. "I asked a question about the Atlas indemnity language." Madeline's face tightened. "What question?" "Why the legacy liability protection disappeared." "Grant removed it." "The revision trail had his approval." Madeline thought of the document she had reviewed earlier, the final contract Ethan repaired, the language Atlas had objected to. "You brought it up." "In a transaction meeting." "What happened?" "He told me contracts were not my concern." "And the next morning you were fired." "Yes." Madeline looked down at the folder. Something inside the story shifted. Her trip to Ethan's house had begun as an apology. Now it felt like evidence gathering. "Why did you print the original draft?" Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. "You saw that legal told me a document was printed from your credentials before termination. I kept a copy. That violates company policy. So did accepting the wrong liability structure." Madeline looked at him. "You really do not care whether I like your answers." No. That time she did smile. Barely. Most people do. That sounds exhausting. The smile disappeared, but not because she was offended. Because he was right. Madeline looked toward the street. I came here thinking my company had made one stupid decision. Ethan said nothing. Now I think there is a reason behind it. There is always a reason. That does not mean it is a good one. No. She looked at him. I'm going to find out. Ethan nodded. Then start with Rachel Bennett. Madeline's eyes sharpened. Why, Rachel? She was in the room when Grant told me to stay away from transaction files. Did she say something? No. Then why her? Ethan considered his words. Because when Grant told me to leave, she looked scared. Madeline replayed that morning's boardroom in her head. Rachel standing near the glass wall, the way she hesitated before saying Ethan's name. Grant looking at her. A warning glance. Madeline had noticed it then. She had not understood it. Now she did. Or at least she understood enough. Ethan stepped back slightly. It is late. Madeline looked at the open doorway. Warm light spilled across the porch. Right. She started down the steps, then stopped. Ethan. He waited. Why did you really save the deal? I told you. No. Madeline turned back. You told me why a responsible employee would have tried to save it. You were no longer an employee. Ethan looked at her. She continued. You had just been humiliated. You had a daughter to worry about. Your company had decided you were disposable. Her voice softened. And you still sat at that kitchen table until almost 3 a.m, fixing a transaction for people who would not have known if you had gone to bed instead. Ethan was quiet for a long time. Then he looked toward the hallway. Sophie asked me if we were okay. Madeline waited. I told her yes. His eyes returned to hers. I wanted that answer to still mean something when I said it. Madeline felt that sentence settle somewhere deeper than the others. She nodded once, then walked back to her car. This time, Ethan stayed on the porch until she drove away. The next morning, Madeline arrived at Halstead Rowe before 7. Rachel Bennett was already there. Madeline found her alone in the executive break room, pouring coffee into a paper cup. Rachel looked up. Morning. Close the door. Rachel's hand stopped. Madeline did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Rachel closed the door. Madeline stood across from her. I went to Ethan Cole's house last night. Rachel's face changed, only for a second. Enough. You did, yes. Rachel looked down at her coffee. Madeline watched her. I need you to tell me everything you know. Rachel's fingers tightened around the cup. I do not know what you mean. Do not do that. Rachel looked up. Madeline's voice stayed calm. You have worked for me for 4 years. I know when you are nervous, when you are angry, when you are lying, and when you are trying very hard not to lie. Rachel's eyes moved toward the door. Madeline saw it. Again. Grant cannot hear you. Rachel said nothing. Madeline pulled out a chair. Sit. Rachel sat. Madeline remained standing. When did Grant first ask about Ethan? Rachel stared at the coffee lid. 8 months ago. Madeline felt a small chill. Not yesterday. Not during Atlas. 8 months. What did he ask? He wanted to know whether Ethan was assigned to any major transaction support. Why? He did not say. What exactly did he tell you? Rachel swallowed. To keep him away from anything important. Madeline stared at her. An IT technician. Yes. Grant Mercer, the chief operating officer of this company, personally instructed my executive assistant to keep one IT technician away from major deals. Rachel nodded. Did that seem normal to you? No. What did you do? What he asked. Why? Rachel looked up. Fear crossed her face. Because Grant does not ask twice. Madeline sat across from her. Rachel. Rachel's voice dropped. I thought it was strange. I thought maybe Ethan had done something. Maybe there was a security concern. Maybe Grant knew something I did not. Did you ask? Once. And he told me to worry about my own job. Madeline sat very still. That was 8 months ago. Yes. And you did not tell me. Rachel's eyes filled with shame. No. Why? Rachel looked toward the door again, then back at Madeline. I have a mortgage. Madeline said nothing. My mother is in assisted living in Gastonia. I pay most of it. My brother cannot help. If I lose this job, I do not lose just my apartment. Her voice broke slightly. I lose her care. Madeline's anger did not disappear, but it changed shape. Rachel looked down. I know that is not an excuse. No. Madeline's answer was quiet. It is not. Rachel nodded. But it is a reason. Rachel looked at her. Madeline leaned forward. Reasons matter because they tell me what kind of pressure someone used. Rachel's mouth tightened. Madeline watched her carefully. What else? Nothing. It came too quickly. Madeline sat back. Rachel looked at the table. Rachel, I told you what I know. No. Rachel's eyes lifted. Madeline's tone remained controlled. You told me what you are ready to admit. Silence. Madeline stood. She picked up Rachel's coffee cup and moved it slightly away from the edge of the table where Rachel had almost crushed it. I am not going to force it out of you. Rachel blinked. But hear me clearly. Madeline looked directly at her. If there is something else, you bring it to me. She paused. Not Grant. Rachel's face went pale. Me. Rachel nodded. Madeline reached the door. Behind her, Rachel said quietly, Not everything at this company is what you think it is. Madeline stopped. She looked back. What does that mean? Rachel shook her head. I cannot. Madeline wanted to push. Every instinct she had as a chief executive told her to force clarity. But Ethan had said Rachel looked afraid. Fear did not respond well to force. Madeline opened the door. Then tell me when you can. She left Rachel alone. At 8:30, Grant Mercer walked into Madeline's office without knocking. That alone irritated her. He carried 2 coffees. He placed one on her desk. You look tired. Madeline did not touch it. So do you, Grant smiled. Board meeting ran late. There was no board meeting. The smile stayed. Informal conversation. With whom? Richard Voss, Holloway, couple of others. Madeline leaned back. Grant had spent years making these conversations sound harmless. Her father had trusted him. That trust had become part of the company's architecture. Grant knew which directors cared about earnings, which ones cared about reputation, which ones still thought Madeline had inherited authority faster than she earned it. He had publicly supported her appointment after her father's death. Privately, Madeline had always suspected he enjoyed reminding people how much experience she lacked. Grant sat without being invited. Atlas signing should calm everyone down. Madeline watched him. Should it? It is a major win. You told the board it was dead. It nearly was, until it was not. Grant's gaze sharpened. He knew where this was going. Madeline saw that too. You reinstating the IT guy. Ethan Cole. Right. Grant leaned back. Ethan. Madeline studied him. You approved his termination. I approve hundreds of things. Not personally. Department recommendation. One person was terminated. Grant shrugged. Then somebody thought he was a problem. Who? I would have to check. Madeline smiled without warmth. Interesting. Grant's face hardened slightly. What is? Yesterday you knew enough about him to sign his termination. Today you need to check. Grant looked at her. The office grew quiet. Then he laughed. You are reading too much into routine paperwork because a fired technician got lucky with some contract language. Madeline felt something cold settle inside her. Lucky. Grant did not know what Ethan had been. Or maybe he did. Have you read the final proposal? Of course. Then you know it was not luck. Grant picked up his coffee. Madeline, do not turn this into a fairy tale because you are embarrassed somebody lower on the organization chart caught something legal missed. She held his gaze. This is not about embarrassment. Then what is it about? She did not answer. Grant leaned forward. You need to be careful. The words were soft, almost paternal. Madeline had heard that tone from him before, usually in board meetings, usually when he wanted to remind her he had known her father longer than she had run the company. Careful with what? Creating a crisis where none exists. Madeline looked at him. There is no crisis. Atlas closed. An indemnity protection disappeared. Legal judgment. Then an IT technician questioned it. Grant's fingers tightened slightly around the coffee cup. Madeline continued. Then you approved his termination the next morning. Grant stood. You are connecting things that have nothing to do with each other. Maybe. He looked at her. She did not look away. Grant smiled again, but the warmth was gone. You have enough enemies on that board without inventing new ones inside your own company. Madeline felt the sentence for what it was. Not advice, a reminder. She stood too. Get out of my office, Grant. For a second he looked genuinely surprised. Then he nodded. Of course. At the door he turned. Your father trusted me. Madeline stared at him. My father is dead. Grant's jaw tightened. Madeline continued. So if you want my trust, earn mine. Grant left without answering. Madeline stood alone for several seconds. Then she called legal. I want every revision to the Atlas agreement going back 1 year. A lawyer began to answer. Madeline cut him off. And every access record tied to Grant Mercer. Silence. Madeline, that could be sensitive. I am aware. Should we notify him? No. She ended the call. Across town, Ethan's phone rang at 4:16 that afternoon. He was in the school pickup line. Sophie sat beside him eating apple slices from a plastic container. The number had a New York area code. Ethan looked at it. He knew it. He had not seen it in years. He almost let it ring out, then answered, Hello? A man's voice laughed softly. I knew it. Ethan closed his eyes. Daniel. Sophie looked over. Daniel Price had worked beside Ethan at Blackwell Sterling. He was one of the few people who had never stopped calling during the first year after Claire died. Eventually, Ethan had stopped answering. Daniel sounded exactly the same, too confident, too amused by life. I hear you closed Atlas from a kitchen table. Ethan looked at Sophie. Where did you hear that, do not insult me? That was not an answer. The industry is small. The industry gets even smaller when a dead man starts negotiating again. I am not dead. Professionally, you have been a ghost for 10 years. Sophie whispered, Who is it? Ethan covered the phone. Old friend. Daniel heard. Is that Sophie? Ethan took his hand away. Yes. She was a baby last time I saw her. She is 8. Daniel went quiet for a moment. Then his voice softened. God. Ethan watched cars move forward in the pickup line. Daniel continued. Come back. No. You have not heard the offer. I do not need to. 900 guaranteed. Ethan stared through the windshield. Daniel. Partner track. Your own team. I will build the schedule around you. No. You closed $50 million after being fired. I did not close it for a job. I know. Daniel's voice lost the humor. That is why I am calling. Ethan said nothing. You were never meant to disappear. Ethan looked at Sophie. She was humming quietly, arranging apple slices into a smiley face on the lid of the container. He thought of Manhattan, the elevators, the cars waiting after midnight, the dinners eaten over documents, the hospital corridor. No, Daniel sighed. Think about it. I already did, 10 years ago. People change. Exactly. Daniel was silent. Then he said, My offer stands. The call ended. Sophie looked at him. Was he trying to sell you something? Ethan smiled faintly. Sort of. What? A job. Her eyes widened. A good job. Ethan looked out the window. Depends what you mean by good. Sophie thought about that. Does it have free snacks? Probably. Then good, he laughed. The car moved forward. That evening, after Sophie went outside to ride her bike, Ethan stood at the kitchen window holding Claire's old photograph. A decade ago, returning would have been impossible. Yesterday, it would have been unwanted. Now he was not sure. That uncertainty bothered him. He had built his entire life around one promise: be there for breakfasts, for school pickup, for birthdays, for ordinary Tuesdays. The old Ethan had believed success was something you earned by giving everything else away. The new Ethan had spent 10 years proving the opposite. He did not know whether there was a third version. Someone who could use the skills he had buried without becoming the man Claire once waited for at an empty dinner table. Outside, Sophie lost control of the bike and rolled onto the grass. She jumped up immediately. "I'm okay." Ethan smiled through the glass. His phone buzzed. A message from Madeline. "I need to speak with you tomorrow." No title, no executive phrasing, just one sentence. Ethan read it twice, then put the phone down. At Halstead Rowe, most of the building was already dark. Rachel Bennett remained at her desk. She had stayed late deliberately. At 8:47, the elevator opened. Grant Mercer stepped onto the floor. Rachel lowered her eyes to her computer. Grant walked past without acknowledging her. A minute later, she heard the records room door open. Rachel sat still. Her heart began beating faster. She knew Grant had no reason to be in records at this hour. After another minute, she stood. The hallway was empty. Rachel moved toward the records room. The door had not closed completely. Through the narrow gap, she saw Grant standing beside the industrial shredder. A cardboard archive box rested on the table. Printed across the side, Atlas Renewables. Grant removed a document, looked at it, then fed it into the machine. The blades pulled the paper apart. Rachel stopped breathing. Another page, then another. She reached slowly into her pocket, pulled out her phone. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped it. She opened the camera. Grant removed another document. Rachel raised the phone. One photograph, then a second. Grant turned slightly. Rachel stepped back into the darkness beside an office door. The shredding stopped. Silence. Rachel pressed herself against the wall. Footsteps moved toward the hallway, closer, then stopped. For several seconds, nothing moved. Finally, Grant's footsteps returned to the records room. The shredder started again. Rachel looked down at the photographs on her phone. Grant Mercer, Atlas Records, his hand feeding documents into the machine. She stared at the images until the screen dimmed. Then she locked the phone and walked back toward her desk without making a sound. The next morning, Ethan arrived at Halstead Rowe 10 minutes early. For 6 years, he had entered through the same lobby, nodded to Tommy Ruiz, taken the elevator down, and disappeared beneath the building before most executives finished their first coffee. This time, his temporary visitor badge gave him access to the 31st floor. He stood inside the elevator alone. The numbers climbed. 12, 17, 24, 31. When the doors opened, Ethan did not move for a second. He had watched this floor through security monitors hundreds of times. Polished stone, glass conference rooms, quiet carpet. People who spoke softly because their titles carried enough volume for them. Now he stepped out. Rachel Bennett was waiting near reception. She looked like she had slept even less than Madeline. "She is expecting you." Ethan studied her face. "Everything okay?" Rachel hesitated. Yes. He knew immediately that it was not, but he did not press. "All right." Rachel walked him toward Madeline's office. Before she opened the door, Ethan said quietly, "Rachel." She looked at him. "You do not have to tell me anything." Her expression tightened. "But whatever you are carrying, make sure you are carrying it because you chose to." Rachel stared at him, then nodded once. She opened the door. Madeline stood behind her desk. A folder waited in front of her. Not Atlas this time. Ethan Cole. She gestured toward the chair. "Sit." Ethan sat. Madeline remained standing. "I spent most of last night trying to decide whether offering you your old job back would be insulting. It would." I arrived at the same conclusion. She pushed the folder toward him. Ethan opened it. Special Strategic Advisor to the Chief Executive Officer. He looked at Madeline. "That is not it. No. It is not reinstatement. No. I report to you. Directly." He continued reading. "Flexible schedule. Travel by mutual agreement. No press announcement without written consent. No mandatory relocation." Ethan looked up. "You wrote this yourself." Legal hated that. I imagine they did. Madeline sat across from him. "I am not offering you your old life." Ethan closed the folder. "That is still what this becomes." "It does not have to. It always does." Madeline waited. Ethan looked toward the windows. Charlotte stretched beneath them. From this height, traffic looked silent. People looked small enough that nothing they did could possibly matter. He remembered loving that illusion once. "You know why I left New York?" "Your wife. My wife died." Madeline said nothing. Ethan continued. That is not why I left. She watched him. I left because after she died, I started remembering every dinner I missed before she died. His voice stayed level. Every time I told her one more call, one more closing, one more trip, every time I believed there would be another Friday. Madeline looked down briefly. Ethan rested his hands on the folder. I know what I become when people start telling me I am valuable. What unavailable? The word sat between them. Madeline leaned back. So that is what you are afraid of. Ethan almost smiled. I am not afraid of a job. No. She held his gaze. You are afraid you will be good at it. That reached him. He looked at her more carefully. Madeline continued. If I offered you twice your old salary in a corner office, you would walk out. Yes. If I asked you to become the man in those old articles, you would walk out. Yes. She slid the folder back toward him. I am not asking for that man. Ethan did not touch it. I am asking for the man who stayed up until 2:37 in the morning fixing a deal for a company that had fired him because he could not stand watching people ruin good work. Ethan's eyes lowered to the contract. Madeline's voice softened. And I am asking him to help me understand how a company my father built became a place where people like Grant Mercer could make someone disappear without anyone asking why. Silence. I cannot fix that from the basement, she said. Ethan looked at her. Madeline did not try to smile, did not soften the offer with money, did not promise gratitude. She simply waited. Ethan opened the folder again. Thursday afternoons. Madeline blinked. What about them? I leave at 3. Why? Sophie has soccer. Madeline nodded. Done. No calls after 6 unless the building is physically on fire. Define physically. Flames. Madeline's mouth moved slightly. Fine. No press. Already written. No profile pieces, no industry announcements. No story about the mysterious Wall Street negotiator who came back from the dead. I have no interest in turning your grief into marketing. Ethan looked at her. Something in his expression changed. Small, but real. Madeline held out her hand. Anything else? Ethan looked at it. One thing. What? If I find something you do not like, you still want me to say it. Madeline answered immediately. Especially then. He shook her hand. Her grip was firm. His was careful. Neither released immediately. Then Ethan pulled back and signed. That evening, Sophie sat cross-legged on the living room rug while Ethan cooked pasta. She was coloring the wings of a paper dragon purple. I took the job. Sophie looked up. The snack job? Ethan laughed. I do not know about the snacks. Then why did you take it? He stirred the sauce. Because I think I can help. Sophie considered this. Is it far? No. Will you still pick me up Thursdays? Yes. Soccer Saturdays? Yes. Pancakes Sunday? Ethan hesitated. Sophie pointed the marker at him. That was a trick question. I know. You hate making pancakes. I do not hate making pancakes. You hate making good pancakes. He laughed. She went back to coloring. After a moment she said, Then it sounds okay. Ethan watched her. That easy. She shrugged. If you still come home. He looked at the stove. The sauce bubbled quietly. I will. The next Monday, Ethan returned to Halstead Rowe as an advisor. No announcement, no executive introduction, no photograph. His office was 2 doors from Madeline's. The nameplate read Ethan Cole. For the first time in 6 years, someone had spelled his name correctly without him asking. Tommy Ruiz saw it later that morning. He stood in the doorway and stared. This place finally lost its mind. Ethan looked up from his laptop. Took them long enough. Tommy stepped inside. You got a window, I noticed. You know they charge extra for those upstairs. I will try not to break it. Tommy smiled. Then his expression became more serious. Be careful, Ethan leaned back. With the window. With people who suddenly discover your value after ignoring it. Ethan nodded. I know. Tommy tapped the doorframe and left. For the first 3 days, Ethan rebuilt the Atlas file. Every draft, every comment, every red line, every email legal had preserved. Madeline expected him to focus on the final 72 hours. He went back 9 months. On Wednesday evening, she entered his office carrying 2 coffees. "You have been reading the same contract for 6 hours. Different versions. They all look identical. That is the problem." She placed a coffee beside him. Ethan looked at it. "Is this bribery?" "Yes." "Good." Madeline sat across from him. "What are you looking for?" "Pattern." "In a contract, in people." She frowned. Ethan turned his monitor toward her. "Here." 2 atlas drafts appeared side by side. Version 19, version 20. Madeline scanned them. "I do not see anything." "Exactly." She looked at him. Ethan highlighted a paragraph. "Environmental liabilities. I know the section. Read the header." She did, then the version number. Her eyes narrowed. Version 20 was circulated as a formatting cleanup. "Correct. But this language changed." "Correct. Who approved it?" Ethan clicked the audit panel. "Grant Mercer." Madeline stared at the screen. "Legal should have caught this." "They might have. What does that mean?" Ethan opened an email. A junior lawyer had flagged the change. 2 hours later, another email instructed the team to proceed without further comment. The sender was Grant. Madeline leaned closer. "Why?" Ethan scrolled further. "That is what I am trying to understand." She stood beside him. Their shoulders nearly touched. Ethan opened Atlas property schedules. 3 industrial sites: South Carolina, Georgia, Virginia. He tapped the first. Old battery manufacturing facility. The second, chemical storage. The third, metal processing. Madeline's face changed. Environmental exposure. Potentially significant. How significant? Ethan looked at her. If there is contamination and the indemnity stays removed tens of millions. Madeline slowly sat down. "The deal is worth 50. "Exactly." She looked at the monitor. "So Grant weakened our protection on a transaction where the hidden liability could approach the purchase price." Ethan nodded. "That is not a mistake." "No." "Then what is it?" Ethan did not answer. He clicked another file, a board calendar, an internal memorandum, a draft presentation prepared months before the expected Atlas close. One slide contained a sentence highlighted in gray. "Leadership accountability in event of major transaction failure." Madeline read it twice. Her jaw tightened. "Who wrote this? Office of the COO." She looked at Ethan. "Grant." Ethan nodded. Madeline rose and walked toward the window. If Atlas failed, he could blame me. Yes. If Atlas closed under the weakened indemnity and liabilities surfaced later, he could blame me. Yes. She turned. So either way, he had a story. Madeline stared at him. For the first time since Ethan had known her, she looked genuinely shaken. Not frightened, betrayed. "My father trusted him." Ethan said nothing. She laughed once without humor. "He taught me to trust him." Ethan looked at the files. "People can teach us what they believed." Madeline's eyes returned to him. "They cannot guarantee it was true." She looked at him for a long moment. "You make complicated things sound simple." "No." He took a sip of coffee. "I make them sound survivable." Something softened in her face. She reached for the second coffee at the same moment Ethan moved it away from the documents. Their hands touched. Neither pulled back. For one quiet second, Madeline was not his CEO. Ethan was not her advisor. They were simply 2 tired people sitting too close in a room after dark. Madeline looked at his hand, then at him. Ethan withdrew first. Not sharply, not awkwardly, carefully. Madeline understood why. So did he. The door opened. Rachel stood there. Her face was pale. She carried a manila folder in one hand and her phone in the other. Madeline stood. "Rachel." Rachel closed the door behind her. "I need to show you something." Ethan rose. Rachel placed the folder on the table. Inside were printed copies of Atlas drafts from 8 months earlier. One included the original environmental protection. The next removed it. Grant Mercer's initials appeared on the approval line. Madeline looked up. "Where did you get these?" "I kept them." "Why?" Rachel swallowed. "Because I was scared." She unlocked her phone. The photographs appeared. Grant in the records room, atlas box on the table, pages entering the shredder. Madeline stared at the screen. When, last night, you saw him destroying records. Yes. Why did you not call me? Rachel's eyes filled. I almost did. She looked at Ethan, then at Madeline. He told me 8 months ago that if I ever repeated what I saw, I would never work in this industry again. What did you see? Rachel breathed in slowly. I saw him tell legal to remove the protection. Madeline went still. Rachel continued. A lawyer pushed back. Grant said the instruction came from executive leadership. From me? Rachel nodded. Madeline's voice became cold. I never gave that instruction. I know. Did legal think I did? Yes. Ethan looked at Rachel. What else? She hesitated, then pulled another page from the folder. An email exchange. Grant Mercer. Richard Voss, one of the most influential directors on the board. Madeline began reading. The messages were careful, no direct confession, no sentence anyone would write if they expected investigators to read it. But the meaning was clear. Concerns about Madeline's leadership, timing around the Atlas transaction, potential need for board intervention, discussion of interim executive authority if confidence deteriorated. Madeline sat down. Ethan watched her. Rachel whispered, I am sorry. Madeline did not answer immediately. Her eyes remained on the email. Finally, she said, How long have you had this? 7 months. Madeline looked at her. Rachel's face crumpled. My mother is in assisted living. I pay most of it. Grant knew. Madeline's anger was visible now. Not loud, worse. He used that. Rachel nodded. He said people who become difficult stop getting recommendations. A tear slipped down Rachel's face. I told myself I was protecting my mother. Madeline stood. Rachel flinched slightly. Madeline noticed. Her voice softened. Fear explained silence. Rachel looked at her. It does not erase what silence costs. Rachel nodded. I know. But you are here now. Madeline closed the folder. Thank you. Rachel exhaled as if she had been holding her breath for months. After she left, Madeline remained standing beside Ethan's desk. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then she said, He wanted me gone. Ethan looked at the email. Looks that way. My father's company. Her voice cracked slightly on the word father's. Ethan looked at her. Madeline pressed her lips together. I hate that this hurts. Why? Because I should be angry. You are. I should only be angry. Ethan shook his head. That is not how betrayal works. She looked at him. He continued quietly. It does not only take trust, it makes you question whether you were stupid for giving it. Madeline's eyes held his. Is that experience talking? Some. She stepped closer. Claire. Ethan did not answer. Madeline immediately regretted asking. Sorry. No. He looked down at the desk. Not Claire. He paused. Myself. Madeline said nothing. Ethan looked toward the dark window. For a long time I thought losing her meant every choice I made before that day had been wrong. Madeline's expression softened. Was it? I still do not know. She stood close enough now that he could smell the coffee on her breath. Maybe that is not a question you can answer by disappearing. Ethan looked at her. The room became very quiet. Madeline's hand rested beside his on the desk, almost touching. This time neither moved closer. Neither moved away. Then Ethan's phone rang. He glanced at the screen. Unknown number. He declined it. Madeline stepped back. The moment closed. At that same hour, 3 floors below them, Grant Mercer sat alone in his office. An internal notification glowed on his screen. Atlas Archive Request. Requested by Ethan Cole. Approved by Madeline Halstead. Grant stared at it, then opened another message. Richard Voss. We need to move now. Grant picked up his phone. Call an emergency board session. A pause. Tomorrow morning. He looked toward the ceiling as if he could see through 3 floors of concrete and glass. And prepare everything we have on Cole's access after termination. The following morning, Madeline stepped out of the elevator and immediately knew something was wrong. The executive floor was too quiet. Rachel hurried toward her. They are already here. Who? The board. Madeline stopped. Why, Rachel handed her a printed notice. Special session, internal security review, potential unauthorized transaction access. Madeline read the name at the bottom, Ethan Cole. Her face hardened. Across the hall, the boardroom doors stood open. Grant sat near the far end of the table, Richard Voss beside him. A presentation filled the screen behind them. Internal security review. Ethan Cole Grant looked at Madeline as she entered, then past her. Ethan had just stepped off the elevator. Grant smiled. Since you have been investigating me, Madeline, I thought the board deserved to know exactly who you brought back into this company. Madeline looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at the screen. Then he walked into the boardroom beside her. The doors closed behind them. The boardroom doors closed behind Ethan and Madeline with a soft mechanical click. Nobody moved. 12 directors sat around the long black table. Some Ethan recognized from photographs in annual reports. Others he had seen only from a distance during 6 years of repairing systems beneath their offices. Now, every face was turned toward him. Grant Mercer sat near the far end of the table with Richard Voss beside him. Grant looked rested, prepared, almost pleased. The screen behind him displayed Ethan's employee photograph. Not the old Wall Street profile, the basement badge photo, plain shirt, neutral expression, the image Halstead and Rowe had used to define him for 6 years. Grant gestured toward an empty chair. "Mr. Cole." Ethan did not sit. Madeline remained beside him. She looked towards the chairman of the board, Evelyn Holloway. "I was not informed this meeting had been called." Richard Voss answered before Holloway could. "The circumstances required speed." Madeline looked at him. "Whose circumstances?" Voss adjusted his glasses. "Potential unauthorized access to a $50 million transaction by a terminated employee seems urgent enough." Grant leaned back. "We thought you would agree." Madeline's eyes moved to Grant. "I would have agreed if this were an investigation." Her gaze shifted toward the presentation. "This looks more like a verdict." Grant smiled. "Then perhaps Mr. Cole can change our minds." Ethan finally sat. He placed nothing on the table. No folder, no laptop. That bothered Grant. Madeline noticed. She took the chair beside Ethan. Holloway folded her hands. She was in her late 60s and had served on the board since Madeline's father still ran the company. Her voice was measured. "Grant has raised serious questions." "I assume he has." Madeline looked at him. Grant clicked a remote. The next slide appeared. A timeline. Ethan's termination at 9:31 in the morning. External deal room access at 9:54 that night. Revisions uploaded between 10:23 and 2:31. Atlas signature at 2:37. Grant looked around the table. "These are not disputed facts." Ethan glanced at the screen. "No." Several directors looked at him. Grant seemed almost disappointed. "You admit accessing deal materials after your termination?" "Yes." "Without authorization?" "No." Grant's smile returned. "You had been fired." "From Halstead and Rowe." "Exactly." The credentials were issued by the independent deal room provider under an access authorization that Atlas Counsel had requested 3 weeks earlier. Grant's expression barely changed. Ethan continued. "The authorization remained active. I did not enter the Halstead and Rowe network. I did not use company credentials. I did not download restricted internal documents after termination." Voss leaned forward. "You are making a technical distinction." "No." Ethan looked at him. "I am making the distinction your lawyers would make." Silence. Holloway glanced toward company counsel seated against the wall. "Is he correct?" The general counsel shifted in his chair. "The third-party access authorization was technically still valid." Grant cut in. "Technically." Ethan looked at him. "There is that word again." Grant's jaw tightened. Madeline said nothing. She had learned quickly that Ethan was most dangerous when other people mistook calm for weakness. Grant advanced the slide. A series of document revisions appeared. Mr. Cole made material changes to transaction language after he no longer worked for the company. "I propose changes. You rewrote the indemnity structure." "Yes." "Without instruction." "Yes." Grant turned toward the board. "And we are supposed to believe that the same man who accessed the deal after termination also discovered evidence that conveniently implicates the executive who approved his firing." A few directors shifted. There it was. The story Grant needed, not proof, suspicion. Ethan looked toward the screen. Grant continued. Mr. Cole had motive. Madeline spoke. Motive to save the transaction. Grant ignored her. He had access to external deal materials. He had expertise he deliberately concealed from this company. That caught more attention. One director named Charles Benton leaned forward. What does that mean? Grant changed the slide. An old photograph appeared. Ethan in Manhattan, tailored suit. Blackwell Sterling Partners. A headline beneath it. The quiet closer behind Wall Street's most difficult deals. Whispers moved around the room. Grant watched them. This is the man Madeline brought back into the company. Madeline's voice sharpened. You say that as though I concealed it. You certainly did not disclose it to the board. I learned it 3 days ago. Grant looked toward Ethan, but he knew it for 10 years. Ethan met his gaze. Yes. Benton looked at Ethan. You worked here in IT while having this background? Yes. For 6 years, yes. Why? Grant answered for him. That is precisely what concerns me. Ethan turned toward Benton instead. Because 10 years ago, my wife died. The room changed. Grant's expression hardened. Ethan continued quietly. My daughter was 8 months old. Nobody interrupted. I had spent most of the years before that believing family could wait until after the next closing. He looked toward the windows. Charlotte lay beneath them in morning light. I was very good at convincing people that deadlines mattered more than dinners. His eyes returned to the board. Then one Tuesday, there were no more dinners to miss. Holloway looked down. Ethan's voice remained steady. I left New York because I did not want my daughter growing up with a father whose attention had to be scheduled between transactions. Voss shifted impatiently. That is tragic, Mr. Cole, but it does not answer why you concealed relevant professional history. It answers exactly that. Ethan looked at him. I did not want the history to be relevant. He rested his hands on the table. I wanted a job where I could leave at 5. Silence. I wanted to pick Sophie up from school. Another pause. I wanted ordinary. Grant scoffed quietly. Ethan heard it. So did Madeline. Grant leaned forward. And yet the moment you were fired, you suddenly became Ethan Cole of Blackwell Sterling again. Ethan looked at him. No. Grant smiled. You expect this board to believe that the man you are talking about would have let the deal collapse? Grant's smile faded. Ethan continued. He would have waited until morning and offered to fix it for a 7-figure consulting fee. One of the directors almost smiled. Ethan did not. I fixed Atlas because I knew the problem. He looked at Grant. And because people who had nothing to do with my termination had spent 6 months building that transaction. Grant tapped the table. How noble. Madeline's eyes hardened. Ethan only looked at him. It was not noble. What was it? Work. That irritated Grant more than anger would have. Holloway raised one hand. Enough. The room settled. She looked at Grant. You allege data manipulation. Grant nodded. Yes. Show us. Grant changed the slide again. Document metadata filled the screen. Revision histories, timestamps, user identifiers. Grant stood. The indemnity language in question was preserved in files Mr. Cole later reviewed. We have no way of knowing whether those files were modified before he produced them for Madeline. Ethan finally reached for the leather portfolio beside his chair. Grant noticed. Madeline almost did not. Ethan opened it and removed 3 sealed envelopes. He placed them on the table. Grant stopped speaking. Ethan slid the first toward Holloway. Morrison Hale. Holloway looked at him. Atlas Outside Counsel. The second envelope. Carson Data Systems. The third. Thorne Environmental Law. Voss frowned. What are these? Records. Grant's expression changed. Ethan looked directly at him. From people I do not control. He opened the first envelope. Inside was a certified copy of the Atlas draft transmitted 8 months earlier. The environmental protection was intact. The second contained an immutable transaction log from the third-party platform. It recorded every document, upload, revision, and user identity. The third held counsel correspondence discussing the original liability structure before Grant's revision. Ethan slid copies around the table. These were obtained yesterday through counsel. Grant stared at Madeline. You authorized this, Madeline answered calmly. I authorized independent verification. Grant's face tightened. Holloway turned to the general counsel. Are these authentic? The lawyer nodded. We verified the certifications this morning. Grant looked at him sharply. You knew about this? The lawyer did not answer. Holloway examined the audit log. She followed the timeline with one finger. 11:17 p.m. She looked at Grant. This user account is yours. Grant leaned forward. Executive credentials are often used by staff. Ethan spoke. Not on that system. Grant turned. Excuse me. Multi-factor authentication. Ethan pointed to the record. Your physical security token was required. Grant said nothing. Ethan continued. The login originated from your office network. Grant's voice became sharper. Which proves someone was in my office, and your building access record shows you entered at 10:53 and left at midnight. Ethan placed another page on the table. Grant stared at it. Madeline had not seen that document. She looked at Ethan. He had done more work than he told her. Grant's face began to color. Voss stepped in. Even if Grant approved the revision, executives revise contracts all the time. Correct. Ethan looked at him. The question is why? Voss sat back. Madeline opened the folder Rachel had given her. We know why. Grant's eyes moved to the folder. For the first time that morning, genuine fear entered his face. Madeline removed the original Atlas drafts. Then the email from the junior lawyer objecting to the removal of environmental protection. Then Grant's instruction to proceed. She slid them toward Holloway. The legal team objected. Grant recovered quickly. They object to everything. That is what lawyers do. Madeline continued. They were told the instruction came from executive leadership. Grant shrugged. It did. Madeline looked at him. Which executive? Grant hesitated. A second. Barely. Enough. You, he said. Madeline nodded slowly. Then show them. Grant stared. The authorization. Madeline folded her hands. If I ordered you to remove a provision exposing this company to potentially tens of millions in legacy environmental liability, there should be a record. Grant looked toward Voss. Madeline saw it. So did Holloway. Grant turned back. Not every conversation is documented. Convenient. You gave verbal instructions all the time. About office operations. Madeline's voice stayed level. Not material transaction risk. Grant leaned forward. You are rewriting history. Madeline looked toward the door. Rachel. Grant froze. The door opened. Rachel Bennett stepped inside. Her face was pale, but she walked straight to the table. Grant stared at her. What are you doing here? Rachel did not answer him. She looked at Holloway. My name is Rachel Bennett. I am Madeline Halstead's executive assistant. We know who you are, Holloway said gently. Rachel nodded. She held her phone in one hand. Madeline could see it trembling. Rachel looked at Grant. He gave her a look Madeline recognized immediately. The same one from the morning Atlas closed. A warning. Rachel saw it too. Her hand stopped shaking. I was present when Mr. Mercer instructed legal to remove the Atlas environmental protection. Grant sat back. That is false. Rachel continued. He told them the order came from Madeline. You misunderstood. I asked him whether Madeline had approved it. Grant stood. This is ridiculous. Rachel looked directly at him. You told me to stop asking questions if I wanted to keep working in finance. Silence. Grant's voice lowered. Rachel, think very carefully. Madeline rose. Sit down, Grant. He ignored her. Rachel's face tightened. Grant continued. You are accusing a senior executive based on a conversation from 8 months ago. No. Rachel unlocked her phone. I am accusing you based on 8 months. She placed the phone on the table. A photograph appeared on the boardroom screen through the room's wireless display. Grant stood in the records room, Atlas archive box beside him, document in his hand, the shredder open. Nobody spoke. Another photograph appeared, then another. Grant's face drained of color. Holloway looked at him. When were these taken? Rachel answered. Last night. Grant looked around the room. I was disposing of duplicate records. Madeline almost laughed. During an internal review? I did not know there was an internal review. Ethan spoke quietly. That makes it worse. Grant turned on him. Stay out of this. Ethan did not move. Holloway looked toward company counsel. Does document destruction during a pending transaction review violate retention policy? The lawyer answered carefully. Potentially several policies. Grant pointed toward Rachel. She has no context. Rachel's eyes filled, but her voice stayed firm. I have more context than anyone in this room except you. Grant stared at her. Rachel took a breath. 8 months ago, you told me to keep Ethan Cole away from major transactions. A murmur spread around the table. Madeline watched directors turn toward Grant. Holloway frowned. Why? Rachel answered. He never told me. Grant shook his head. This is fantasy. Rachel continued. He ordered me to notify him if Ethan appeared on any deal team. Grant looked toward Madeline. Because Cole had unauthorized interest in work outside his role. Ethan finally spoke. 8 months ago I had never spoken to you. Grant turned. That is not true. It is. You had raised concerns. Not to you. Grant stopped. Ethan watched him. The first time I spoke to you directly was 3 days before you fired me. Silence. Grant had moved too quickly. Madeline saw Holloway register it. So did Benton. If Grant had been monitoring Ethan 8 months earlier, the explanation could not be the Atlas confrontation from 3 days before termination. Holloway leaned forward. Why were you tracking him 8 months ago? Grant sat down. His voice changed, less confident. We had general security concerns. Document them. Grant looked at her. What? Holloway's tone hardened. Document the security concern. Grant glanced toward Voss. Voss looked down at his papers. No help. Grant said, I would have to retrieve the file. Ethan watched him. There is no file. Grant snapped toward him. You do not know that. No. Ethan's voice remained calm. But if there were, you would have brought it. Grant's hands flattened against the table. Madeline opened the final section of Rachel's folder. That is not all. Richard Voss looked up sharply. Madeline noticed. Good. She removed the email exchange. Voss stood. Madeline. She looked at him. You should consider carefully what you are about to do. Madeline almost smiled. You sound like Grant. Voss's face tightened. Those are private board communications. They are communications concerning my removal as CEO. Directors turned toward Voss. Holloway's expression changed. What? Madeline began distributing copies. Voss reached for one. His eyes moved quickly across the page. Grant looked at him. For the first time, the two men looked less like allies and more like people calculating which one might survive. Madeline read aloud. Atlas failure may provide the cleanest opening. She looked at Voss. Your words. Voss responded immediately. A hypothetical governance discussion. Madeline read another line. Confidence needs to deteriorate before intervention looks justified. The room went silent. Voss shook his head. You are removing context. Madeline looked at Grant. Would either of you like to provide it? Grant said nothing. Voss spoke. The board had legitimate concerns about your leadership. Then bring them to the board. We did. No. Madeline's voice remained calm. You discussed engineering the moment when the board would be most receptive to removing me. Voss laughed sharply. Engineering. Madeline tapped the Atlas file. A transaction Grant weakened in a way that created two possible outcomes. She looked around the table. If Atlas failed, I could be blamed for losing one of our largest strategic transactions. Then toward Grant. If Atlas closed under his language and environmental liability surfaced later, I could be blamed for approving catastrophic risk, Ethan added quietly. Either outcome created the same leadership story. Grant looked at him with open hatred now. You're building a conspiracy out of ordinary business decisions. Ethan's eyes stayed on Grant. Then explain the ordinary business reason for removing the protection. Grant opened his mouth. Nothing came. Ethan waited. Pricing concession. Silence. Regulatory requirement. Nothing. Atlas demand. Grant's jaw moved. Ethan leaned back. No. Grant slammed one palm against the table. You think because you spent a few years on Wall Street you understand this company. Ethan did not react. I understand the clause. You understand nothing. Grant stood. You disappeared for 10 years. You hid in a basement fixing monitors. Then suddenly you decide you get to walk into this room and lecture people who actually built something. Ethan looked at him. Grant's voice rose. You are nobody trying to become important again? Madeline started to speak. Ethan touched the table lightly with 2 fingers. She stopped. He looked at Grant. No. The word was quiet. Grant laughed bitterly. No. I do not think this makes me important. Grant stared at him. Then why are you here? Ethan looked around the boardroom. At directors, at Rachel, at Madeline, then back at Grant. Because my daughter asked me 2 nights ago if everything was okay. Grant frowned. Ethan continued. I told her yes. His voice softened. Then I realized I was teaching her something without meaning to. Nobody moved. That being safe mattered more than being honest. Rachel looked down. Ethan looked at Grant. I spent 10 years trying to protect Sophie from the worst parts of the world. He paused. I do not want to protect her so well that she grows up believing the easiest thing to do is always the right one. Grant stared at him. Ethan leaned back. That is why I am here. Grant laughed once, but nobody joined him. Holloway looked toward Rachel. Do you have anything else? Rachel hesitated, then nodded. Yes. Grant's face changed again. Rachel reached into her folder. There was another employee. Madeline looked at her. What employee? Daniel Foster, compliance. Grant snapped Rachel. She kept speaking. 2 years ago, he raised concerns about an expense approval process tied to Grant's division. Holloway frowned. I remember Foster leaving. Rachel nodded. Everyone was told he resigned. Grant pointed at her. He did. Rachel shook her head. I processed the severance agreement. Madeline stared at Grant. Rachel continued. He was pushed out. Grant's voice hardened. That has nothing to do with Atlas. It has to do with pattern. Ethan said it quietly. Rachel nodded. He was threatened with litigation if he discussed the reason. Madeline looked toward counsel. I want that agreement preserved. The lawyer nodded. Grant looked around the room. The balance had shifted. He knew it. For years he had been the most confident man in any room at Halstead Rowe. Directors had mistaken confidence for certainty. Employees had mistaken it for authority. Now that confidence looked different. Desperate. Richard Voss pushed his chair back. I think we should adjourn until independent counsel can review this. Madeline looked at him. No. Voss stared. You cannot possibly think a board should act on this today. I think this board has delayed acting for 8 months without knowing it. Madeline. She stood. The room quieted. Grant Mercer remains Chief Operating Officer while we discuss whether the evidence proving he manipulated a major transaction is sufficiently uncomfortable. Grant shook his head. Proving, Madeline continued. He destroyed records last night. Duplicates. He threatened an employee. Her claim. He misrepresented my authorization to legal. Her claim. He personally monitored an IT technician for months before firing him after that technician questioned the same contract he altered. Grant looked toward Holloway. This is insane. Madeline rested both hands on the table. I move that Grant Mercer be suspended from all duties effective immediately pending an independent investigation. Silence. Grant stared at her. Richard Voss stood. I object. Holloway looked at him. You may vote. Voss's face tightened. Madeline continued. I also move that an independent governance review examine Richard Voss's communications with executive management regarding leadership succession and Atlas. Voss went still. Now it was his turn to lose color. Holloway looked around the table. Second. For 1 second, no one moved. Then Charles Benton raised his hand. I second both motions. Grant looked at him in disbelief. Another director spoke. Call the vote. Holloway began with Grant's suspension. 1 hand, then another, then 3 more. Grant watched them rise around the table. People who had laughed at his jokes. People who had taken his calls. People who had trusted his forecasts. 9 votes in favor. 2 against. One abstention. The motion passed. Grant stood so quickly his chair struck the wall. "You have no idea what you are doing." Madeline looked at him. "The board just decided otherwise." Grant pointed at Ethan. "You think he is going to save you?" Ethan did not move. Grant looked back at Madeline. "You inherited a company you do not understand." Madeline's face remained still. "I understand enough. I built half your client relationships. Then I hope they valued the company more than they valued you." Grant's voice dropped. "You will be calling me by winter." Madeline pressed the intercom button. "Security." Grant stared at her. For a moment, something ugly settled over his face. "Your father would be ashamed of you." The room froze. Madeline's eyes changed. Ethan saw it. The sentence had reached exactly where Grant intended. Madeline stood motionless. Then she said quietly, "My father trusted you." Grant almost smiled. Madeline continued, "That was his mistake." The smile vanished. "And keeping you because I was afraid to question his judgment would have been mine." The boardroom door opened. Tommy Ruiz entered with another security officer. He saw Grant, then Ethan. A flicker of understanding crossed Tommy's face. Grant laughed in disbelief. "You sent lobby security?" Tommy looked at him. 20 years, Mr. Mercer." He gestured toward the door. "I know every exit." Grant looked around the table one final time. Nobody met his eyes, not even Richard Voss. Grant straightened his jacket. As he passed Ethan, he stopped, close enough that only the people nearest them could hear. "You could have stayed invisible." Ethan looked at him. "I know. You should have." Ethan's expression did not change. Grant waited for something else. He did not get it. Tommy stepped forward. "Time to go." Grant walked out. The doors remained open. Employees had gathered beyond the glass walls. Word traveled quickly in corporate buildings. They watched the chief operating officer cross the executive floor between two security officers. Nobody spoke. Grant kept his eyes forward. His reflection moved across every glass wall he passed. For years, people had stepped aside when he approached. Now they stepped aside for a different reason. The elevator doors opened. Tommy looked at Grant. "After you." Grant entered. The doors closed. The boardroom remained silent. Madeline sat down. For the first time that morning, her hands trembled, only slightly. She placed them beneath the table. Ethan noticed. He said nothing. Holloway spoke. "We are not finished." Madeline looked at her. Holloway held up the emails involving Richard Voss. "No." Madeline's voice steadied. "We are not." Voss stared at the papers in front of him. His influence had not vanished, but the room had changed. Every director now looked at him differently. Holloway turned toward counsel. "Independent review, outside firm, no reporting line through management." "Agreed." "Preserve every Atlas record." "Already underway. Grant's email, devices, building access." "Yes." Holloway looked at Rachel. "Ms. Bennett." Rachel straightened. "Yes." "You are protected from retaliation while this investigation proceeds." Rachel's eyes filled again. "Thank you." Holloway looked around the table. "Anyone who has concerns brings them directly to outside counsel." Nobody argued. The meeting finally ended shortly before noon. Directors left in groups of 2 and 3. Richard Voss walked out alone. Rachel remained near the wall. Madeline approached her. "You did the hardest thing in that room." Rachel shook her head. "No." She looked toward Ethan. "He did." Ethan stood near the windows gathering documents. Madeline looked back at Rachel. "You both did." Rachel's shoulders lowered, as if some invisible weight had finally shifted. "What happens to me?" Madeline considered the question. "The investigation will ask why you stayed silent." Rachel nodded. "I know. I will not lie for you. I would not ask you to. But I will tell them what Grant threatened and why." Rachel looked at her. Madeline continued. "And I will tell them you came forward before you knew whether I could protect you." Rachel wiped at one eye. "Thank you." She left. Madeline remained in the boardroom. Ethan closed his portfolio. For several seconds, neither spoke. The adrenaline was leaving the room now. Without it, everything felt heavier. Madeline walked toward the windows. Below them, a black sedan pulled away from the curb. Grant sat in the back. She watched until the car disappeared into traffic. "It's over." Ethan came to stand beside her. "No." Madeline looked at him. "The vote passed. That part is over." "What part is not?" Ethan looked back at the empty boardroom, chairs pushed out, half-empty water glasses, documents abandoned in small stacks. "Grant worked here 11 years. Madeline said nothing. "He learned that people were easier to control when they were afraid of losing something." Ethan looked at the door Rachel had walked through. Rachel was afraid of losing her mother's care. Then toward the table. "Martin was probably afraid of losing his job when he signed my termination recommendation." Madeline looked at him. "Legal was afraid to challenge an executive instruction." Ethan's voice stayed calm. "Removing Grant does not remove that." Madeline looked out over Charlotte. "Then what does time?" She frowned. "That is not very useful. Truth usually isn't at first." Madeline almost smiled. Ethan continued. "And systems. Systems. Places people can speak without asking permission from the person they are speaking about." She nodded slowly. "Independent reporting. Real protection. Review of executive termination authority." "Yes." Madeline looked at him. "You have been back 4 days. 3.5. And you are redesigning the company." "No." He looked at her. "I am explaining why your basement had better information than your boardroom." That made her laugh. It came suddenly, quietly, but it was real. Ethan smiled. Madeline turned toward him. "I do not think I could have done that without you." "You could have." "No. I have watched you work. You have known me for 4 days. Long enough." She studied him. Ethan continued. "You would have found Grant eventually." Madeline looked toward the table. "After how many people?" He did not answer. That was answer enough. She stepped closer. "I was wrong about you before I even knew you. You did not know I existed." "That is worse." Ethan looked at her. Madeline's voice softened. "My company decided what you were worth based on the floor you worked on." Ethan did not rescue her from the admission. He did not tell her she should not feel responsible. He simply listened. That was one of the things about him she was beginning to understand. Ethan did not rush to make discomfort disappear. He trusted people to survive it. Madeline looked down. His hand rested beside his portfolio. She placed hers over it. Ethan became still. Neither looked at their hands immediately. The contact was small, warm. Madeline could feel his pulse beneath her fingers. Ethan looked at her. There was no board now, no Grant, no $50 million contract. Only the two of them standing beside a window in a room that still carried the remains of a fight. Madeline's voice was quiet. "I believed you before I had all the proof." Ethan held her gaze. "That was risky." "I know. CEOs are supposed to hate risk. We price it." His mouth moved slightly. "That sounds like something I would say." "I have been spending too much time with you." 3.5 days. "Long enough." Neither moved. Madeline's thumb shifted almost imperceptibly against his hand. Ethan looked down, then back at her. For a second, the distance between them felt very small. Too small for a CEO and her advisor. Too honest for two people who had spent years building lives around control. Ethan gently turned his hand beneath hers. Not pulling away, holding it. Madeline stopped breathing for half a second. Then a voice came from the hallway. "Dad." Ethan released her immediately. Madeline stepped back. Both turned. Sophie stood outside the boardroom beside Tommy. Her backpack hung from one shoulder. Ethan stared. "Sophie." Tommy lifted both hands. "School called. They could not reach you." Ethan pulled out his phone. 9 missed calls. His face changed. "What happened?" Sophie walked into the room. "Nothing. Tommy said water main broke at the school. Early dismissal." Ethan exhaled. He crouched in front of Sophie. "You okay?" She rolled her eyes. "Dad, a pipe broke. I was not in a war." Madeline covered a smile. Sophie noticed her. "Oh." Her eyes moved from Madeline to Ethan, then toward their hands, then back to Madeline. "You are the chocolate apology lady." Madeline laughed. "I suppose I am." Sophie looked at Ethan. "Did she bring chocolate?" "No." Sophie looked disappointed. Madeline said, "I clearly failed the assignment." Sophie nodded gravely. "Pretty badly." Ethan stood. "You are enjoying this?" "Yes." Tommy leaned against the doorway. "I like this kid." Sophie looked around the boardroom. "Is this where you work now?" "Sometimes." She walked toward the long table. "Whoa." Her fingers brushed the polished edge. "Do important people sit here?" Ethan glanced at Madeline. "Sometimes people who think they are important." Madeline smiled. Sophie climbed into the chair Grant had occupied less than an hour earlier. It nearly swallowed her. She spun slightly. Ethan sighed. "Do not." She stopped, then saw the documents. Ethan's name appeared on one page. "Ethan Cole," she pointed. "Your name is on this." Ethan reached for the document a little too quickly. Sophie looked at him. "What is it?" "Work stuff." She frowned. On the screen behind the table, the old presentation still showed his photograph and the words, "Internal Security Review." Sophie's eyes moved toward it, then to Ethan. "Why is your old picture up there?" Ethan looked at Madeline. Madeline saw the exact moment he realized the conversation he had delayed was no longer avoidable. Sophie looked back at the screen. "Did you do something bad?" Ethan's face softened. "No." "Then why were they investigating you?" The room became quiet. Ethan walked toward her. He pulled the chair beside hers and sat. For years, he had believed protecting Sophie meant keeping certain fears outside their house. Now those fears had found her anyway. He looked at his daughter. "There's something I should have told you." Sophie watched him carefully. Ethan took a slow breath. Then he began. Ethan looked at his daughter. "There's something I should have told you." Sophie watched him carefully. Ethan took a slow breath. "I lost my job last week." Her face changed, not dramatically. That made it worse. "You said they were moving things around." "I know." "You said we were okay." "We are." "That is not the same thing." Ethan looked down. "No." Sophie sat back in Grant Mercer's old chair. The room suddenly felt far too large for the conversation. "Why didn't you tell me?" Ethan searched for an answer that did not sound like an excuse. "Because I was scared you would worry." "I worried anyway." "I know. You were acting weird." "I know. You made grilled cheese twice." Ethan almost smiled. Sophie did not. He stopped. Madeline stood near the window without moving. This did not belong to her. Not yet. Ethan leaned closer to Sophie. "I thought if I could fix everything before you knew something was wrong, then you would never have to be scared." Sophie stared at him. "Did Mom know when you were scared?" The question caught him. He looked at her. "Usually." "Did she want you to lie?" "No." Sophie looked down at her hands. "Then why did you—" Ethan had negotiated with people who tried to hide billions behind complicated language. None of them had ever asked a harder question. "Because sometimes adults confuse protecting someone with deciding what they are allowed to know." Sophie thought about that. "So you decided for me?" "Yes." "That was bad." "Yes." She looked at him again. "Are you going to get fired from this job too?" Madeline's eyes moved toward Ethan. Ethan shook his head. "I do not think so." Sophie looked at Madeline. "Can you fire him?" Madeline answered honestly. "Technically." Sophie frowned. "That seems dangerous." Madeline nodded. "It has been." That finally pulled a tiny smile from Sophie. Ethan reached for her hand. "Listen to me." She let him take it. "I cannot promise nothing bad will happen." Sophie's smile disappeared. "But I can promise I will tell you when something important changes." She studied him. "No weird moving things around? No weird moving things around? No fake new job? No. And if you are scared," Ethan paused, "I will try to tell you that too." Sophie nodded slowly. Then she leaned forward and wrapped both arms around his neck. Ethan closed his eyes. He held her tightly. Madeline looked away. Not because the moment embarrassed her, because it felt private enough that watching seemed like taking something. When Sophie finally pulled back, she glanced toward Madeline. "Did you fire him?" Madeline blinked. "Not personally." "Did your company?" "Yes." Sophie considered that. "Then you still owe him chocolate." Madeline smiled. "I definitely do." 3 weeks later, Ethan stood in Madeline's office reading a new employment agreement. He reached the final page. You changed the title. Madeline looked up from her desk. Chief Strategy Advisor. Sounds expensive. It is. Ethan closed the file. No. Madeline leaned back. No to the salary. No to the title. Why? Chief sounds like meetings. You already attend meetings. I dislike most of them. That is because you speak during them. Exactly. Madeline smiled. What do you want? Strategic Advisor. That is what you already are. Then we save ink. Madeline shook her head. Ethan opened the agreement again. 4 days in the office. Remote Friday. Travel only by mutual approval. No media obligations. Thursday, departure at 3. He tapped the page. This stays. Madeline looked. Sophie's soccer. Yes, it stays. No calls after 6. Unless there are flames. Real flames. We established that. Ethan picked up a pen. Madeline watched him sign. You know, Daniel Price called me. Her expression shifted. When? Yesterday. The New York offer. He nodded. More money. A lot more. Madeline kept her face neutral. And I turned it down. She looked at him. Because of Sophie. Partly. What is the other part? Ethan capped the pen. Because I spent 10 years thinking I had 2 choices. Madeline waited. Disappear or become who I used to be? He slid the agreement toward her. Turns out I was being unimaginative. Madeline looked down at his signature, then back at him. I did not know you had that problem. I hide it well. That Friday evening, the doorbell rang at Ethan's house. Sophie ran from the living room. I'll get it. Ethan looked up from the kitchen. Ask who it is first. Sophie stopped. Who is it? Madeline's voice came through the door. The woman who still owes your father chocolate. Sophie opened it immediately. Madeline stood on the porch holding 2 paper bags. One smelled like Thai food. The other contained enough chocolate to concern a dentist. Sophie looked inside. You remembered. I have learned your standards are demanding. They are. Ethan appeared from the kitchen. You brought half a candy store. Madeline stepped inside. I have a reputation to repair. With her or me. Mostly her. Dinner lasted almost 2 hours. Sophie talked through most of it. School, soccer, a girl named Emma who apparently cheated at 4 square but denied it with great confidence. Madeline listened seriously. Not politely. Seriously. Ethan noticed. He noticed the way Sophie stopped looking at him for confirmation before telling Madeline something. The way Madeline laughed without checking her phone. The way the house felt fuller without feeling crowded. After dinner, Sophie disappeared into her room. Ethan and Madeline carried plates into the kitchen. Madeline saw the photograph beside the refrigerator. Claire. She had seen it before from the porch. This time she looked longer. She was beautiful. Ethan set a plate in the sink. Yes. Madeline glanced at him. You do not have to talk about her. I know. He dried his hands. She would have liked you. Madeline looked surprised. You know that... No. A smile touched his face. But she would have asked you difficult questions, so that is usually a good sign. Madeline laughed softly. From the hallway came Sophie's voice. Dad. Ethan turned. She stood holding an old photograph. Claire sat on a park bench with baby Sophie in her arms. Sophie looked down at it. Can I ask something? Always. She hesitated. Do you like Madeline? Ethan glanced at Madeline. Madeline suddenly became very interested in a glass of water. Yes. Sophie nodded. I like her too. Madeline looked over. Then Sophie asked quietly, Does that mean we're forgetting Mom? The room went still. Ethan walked toward her. He crouched. No, but if somebody new is here, that does not make Mom less here. Sophie looked at the photograph. Ethan placed one hand over her heart. Your mom is not a chair. Sophie looked up. What? Nobody replaces her by sitting where she used to sit. He touched the photograph gently. She is part of this house. Then Sophie's chest. Part of you. He looked toward Madeline. And liking someone new does not take anything away from what was already real. Sophie thought about it. So there can be both. Ethan nodded. There can be both. Sophie looked at Madeline. Madeline's eyes were wet. She did not hide it. Okay. Sophie handed the photograph to Ethan, then walked toward her room. Halfway there, she turned. Madeline. Yes. You can come to soccer if you want. Madeline smiled. I would like that. Sophie nodded. Thursday, 3:30. Then she disappeared down the hallway. Ethan looked at Madeline. That is basically a board appointment. I am honored. Months passed. The Atlas investigation expanded beyond Grant Mercer. Richard Voss resigned from the board before the final governance report was released. Several old termination agreements were reopened. Rachel Bennett moved into a newly created governance role with direct access to independent board counsel. Employees received anonymous reporting channels that bypassed executive management. Deal changes involving material risk required documented approval from multiple departments. The basement IT team received access to transaction support meetings when technical systems affected deal integrity. Kyle told Ethan this was the first corporate reform in history caused by somebody noticing the wrong paragraph while fixing permissions. Ethan told him not to put that in writing. Tommy Ruiz received a service award for 20 years with Halstead Rowe. During the ceremony, Madeline gave him a plaque. Tommy looked at it. Does this come with money? Madeline laughed. Yes. Then I love recognition. 6 months after the night Atlas nearly collapsed, the partnership expanded. The original $50 million acquisition had become the foundation for a larger renewable infrastructure agreement across 3 states. The signing ceremony filled the company auditorium. Executives, attorneys, employees, Atlas representatives. No hidden basement technician, no anonymous signature. Ethan stood beside Madeline near the stage. Sophie sat in the 3rd row beside Rachel. She studied the printed program, then nudged Rachel. They spelled his name right. Rachel smiled. Your dad probably checked. Sophie shook her head. No. She pointed toward Madeline. She did. Near the entrance, a younger analyst stopped in front of a framed copy of the original Atlas agreement. He looked at Rachel after the ceremony. Is that really the deal everyone talks about? The original one. The $50 million deal. Rachel nodded. He looked across the room toward Ethan. Who actually closed it? Rachel followed his gaze. Ethan was kneeling beside Sophie, listening seriously while she explained something involving soccer and an unfair referee. Madeline stood nearby, waiting, smiling. Rachel looked back at the analyst. The single dad we fired the day before. The analyst laughed. Rachel did not. Later, the auditorium emptied. Ethan walked with Madeline toward the elevators. She looked at him. You know, when I came to your house that first night, I thought I was going there to fix a mistake? You were. No. Ethan looked at her. Madeline stopped walking. I went because I could not understand why someone we treated that badly still chose to save us. Did you figure it out? I think so. Ethan waited. You were not trying to prove you were better than the people who fired you. She stepped closer. You were trying not to become worse because of them. Ethan smiled slightly. I wasn't looking for another career. I know. I wasn't looking for another company. I know. He took her hand. Madeline looked down at it, then back at him. I definitely wasn't looking for you. She raised an eyebrow. That is a terrible romantic line. I have been out of practice. She laughed. Ethan moved closer. For once, he did not calculate the distance, did not search for the safest answer, did not wait for another Friday. He kissed her, quietly, no audience, no applause, just Madeline's hand tightening around his. From around the corner came Sophie's voice. Dad. They separated. Sophie appeared with her backpack. Are we getting dinner, or are you two talking about contracts again? Ethan cleared his throat. Dinner. Good. She looked at Madeline. He burns grilled cheese when he gets distracted. That happened once. Sophie started walking toward the elevator. 4 times. Madeline laughed and followed her. Ethan stood for a moment. Behind him, the framed Atlas agreement caught the light. His name appeared on the advisory page in full. Ethan Cole, not hidden, not erased, not buried below 30 floors of people who had never noticed him. Sophie called from the elevator. Dad. Ethan turned. Madeline was holding the door. Sophie stood beside her, waiting. Ethan smiled. I'm coming. And this time he was.